Imagine this for a second. It's a big match day. Your phone is buzzing, group chats are exploding with opinions you didn't ask for. People are emotionally exhausted before the game even starts. Someone looks at you and says, "Wait, you don't follow sports?" And suddenly there's a pause, a tiny silence, almost like you've just admitted you don't believe in gravity. If you've ever been in that moment, you know the feeling. Not shame exactly, more like mild confusion, because in your mind, you're thinking, "I'm fine. I'm actually more than fine." But the world around you often treats sports obsession like a default setting of the human brain, as if something must be missing if you don't feel your heart rate spike over a scoreboard. So today, I want to talk directly to you, or maybe to that quiet part of you that's always wondered why you just don't care the way everyone else seems to, why your brain doesn't latch onto teams, rivalries, stats, and seasons. And more importantly, what psychology has to say about people who don't obsess over sports. Because here's the twist. It's not a flaw, it's not indifference, and it's definitely not a lack of passion. It's a different orientation of attention, identity, and emotional reward. And once you see it clearly, you might realize your mind is wired in a surprisingly intentional way. Let's start with a simple truth we don't say out loud very often. Sports obsession isn't really about sports, it's about belonging, emotional regulation, identity reinforcement, and shared narrative. The game is just the stage. The real action is happening inside the brain. When someone follows sports intensely, their brain is getting predictable emotional hits. Anticipation before a match, tension during it, relief or devastation afterward. Dopamine flows not just from winning, but from the ritual itself, the routine. The sense of this matters. For many people, sports become a socially acceptable way to feel deeply without having to explain those feelings. Now here's where your psychology diverges. If you don't obsess over sports, your brain likely doesn't rely on external tribal narratives to generate meaning. You're less driven by borrowed emotional arcs and more by internally generated ones. In simpler terms, your sense of purpose doesn't need a jersey. Think about how you respond to excitement. Maybe you get that same spark from learning something new, creating something from nothing, going deep into a topic at 2 a.m., or having a long conversation that suddenly turns philosophical. Your dopamine isn't tied to scores. It's tied to insight, to progress, to curiosity. Psychologists often talk about something called intrinsic versus extrinsic reward. Sports fandom is largely extrinsic. The emotional payoff depends on something outside of you, a team winning, a player performing, a season unfolding a certain way. But people who don't obsess over sports tend to lean intrinsic. The reward comes from within, from understanding, from mastery, from meaning that doesn't fluctuate with a final score. This is why you can watch people completely ruined by a loss and feel detached, not superior, just puzzled. You're not emotionally invested in outcomes you can't influence. Your brain quietly asks, why suffer for something I didn't create? And that question reveals a lot about how you process control. People who don't obsess over sports often have a stronger internal locus of control. That means, psychologically, you're more focused on what you can shape rather than what you can only witness. You might enjoy watching excellence, you might admire skill, but obsession requires surrendering emotional power to randomness, to referees, to injuries, to chance. And your brain doesn't find that trait appealing. There's also something deeper happening with identity. For many fans, sports teams become extensions of the self. We won, we lost. Notice the language. The brain blurs the line between personal identity and group performance. This can feel grounding for people who crave stable labels in a chaotic world. But if you don't obsess over sports, you may have a more fluid identity. You don't need a permanent external symbol to anchor who you are. You're comfortable evolving, questioning, updating, and that flexibility, while less loud, is psychologically resilient. You probably also noticed something else growing up: the pressure, the way disinterest in sports sometimes got interpreted as arrogance, weakness, or weirdness, as if opting out meant rejecting the group itself. But here's the reality. Your brain simply prioritizes depth over spectacle. Sports are fast. They're emotionally compressed. They give instant narratives. Heroes, villains, comebacks, tragedies. Your mind, on the other hand, prefers slow burns, complex stories without clear winners, questions that don't resolve by halftime. Neuroscience suggests that people vary widely in what stimulates their reward systems. Some brains light up with competition and dominance hierarchies, others light up with pattern recognition, imagination, or meaning-making. Neither is better. They're just different operating systems. And yours doesn't run on the scoreboard. You might be the kind of person who watches people more than events, who listens for subtext in conversations, who notices how someone's tone changes when they talk about something they love. That sensitivity often replaces the need for collective emotional release through sports. There's also a strong link between sports obsession and emotional outsourcing. Life is hard. Stress builds up. Sports provide a safe container to release anger, joy, disappointment, and hope. You scream at the TV, and somehow it feels cathartic. If you don't obsess over sports, you likely process emotions differently. You don't outsource them, you metabolize them. You sit with them. You think about them, sometimes too much. Sometimes at night when everyone else is asleep and your brain won't shut up. That doesn't mean you're emotionally flat. It means your emotional world is internalized, not broadcast. Interestingly, studies on personality traits often show that people lower in trait aggression and dominance seeking are less drawn to competitive spectator activities. They don't need vicarious victories. Their self-worth isn't enhanced by association with power or conquest. Instead, your fulfillment might come from alignment, from living in a way that feels coherent with your values, from understanding yourself a little better today than you did yesterday. There's also the question of time perception. Sports fandom asks you to invest massive amounts of attention into outcomes that reset every season. New year, new hope, same emotional loop. For some people, that cycle is comforting, but for you, repetition without transformation feels empty. You might ask yourself, what am I building here? And if the answer is nothing lasting, your interest fades. Your brain is future-oriented, not nostalgia-oriented. You don't romanticize the past as easily. You're more interested in what could be than what was. This often shows up in how you handle conversation, too. Small talk about last night's game drains you, not because you're antisocial, but because it doesn't expand your mental map. You crave conversations that go somewhere, conversations that change something. And yes, this can make you feel out of sync, like you're standing slightly to the side of the crowd, watching everyone cheer at the same time, wondering if you missed the memo. But that distance gives you perspective. You're less likely to get swept up in mass emotion, less likely to confuse excitement with meaning, less likely to mistake noise for significance. In a world that constantly tries to hijack attention, that's not a weakness. It's cognitive independence. Now, let's be honest. There are moments when not caring about sports can feel isolating. Sports are social glue, they're an easy bridge between strangers, and sometimes you wish you could just care enough to join in. That feeling doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human. Your brain just prefers fewer, deeper connections over many surface-level ones. You don't bond over shared spectacle, you bond over shared understanding, and that takes longer. It's rarer, but it's also more durable. There's a quiet confidence in people who don't obsess over sports, not the loud kind, the kind that doesn't need constant validation. You're not emotionally dependent on collective highs. You don't need permission to enjoy what you enjoy. Psychologically, this often correlates with higher self-directedness. You curate your inner world carefully. You choose what enters it. And you're okay being misunderstood if it means staying aligned with yourself. And here's something rarely mentioned. Not obsessing over sports often frees up enormous cognitive space. Attention is a limited resource, where others track stats, schedules, and rivalries. You're exploring ideas, skills, or inner landscapes. That space becomes imagination, or introspection, or creativity, or philosophical wandering. Sometimes it becomes rest, real rest, the kind that isn't just distraction. So if you've ever wondered why you don't feel that pull, why your heart doesn't race at the sound of a crowd, why you'd rather be alone with your thoughts than surrounded by chance, the answer isn't that you lack passion. It's that your passion isn't outsourced. It lives inside your questions, your curiosity, your quiet moments of insight, your slow, deliberate way of making sense of the world. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this. Psychology isn't about normal versus abnormal. It's about patterns. And your pattern suggests a mind that values meaning over momentum, depth over drama, autonomy over allegiance. That's not something to fix. It's something to understand. So the next time someone looks at you with disbelief and says, you don't follow sports, you don't need a defense, you don't need an explanation, you can just smile, knowing that your brain is busy playing a different game entirely. One with no seasons, no referees, no final score, just continuous growth. If this resonated with you, take a moment to sit with it. Maybe even share your experience in the comments. Or stay curious and keep exploring the psychology behind the quiet, overlooked patterns that shape who we are. There's a lot more there than most people ever notice.